To get the most out of this video, listen to the introduction to understand what is going to happen astrologically this week and when it will occur. Then use the timestamps in the description box or comments section below to go to your sun, moon, and rising signs to see how things will generally affect you. This is a general read of the astrological energies that will be playing out this week. For a specific assessment of how the planetary energies will affect you personally, I would suggest getting a reading with a professional astrologer. You can do so with me through the Guiding Star Astrology website. If you're new to astrology, you are so welcome on this platform. If you would like to learn to read your own astrology chart, you can do a short, fun course with me for $35 Australian. The link is in the description below. Thank you to all my YouTube subscribers and my Patreon family members. Without you, this video and its message would not be possible. Hello, I'm Kesenya, and welcome to this series that I've been preparing for you all about Neptune and Neptune's transits through every house in the horoscope and how it will affect your life. Now, I've been wanting to do this series for quite some time now. However, I decided I'd wait until Neptune had crossed my ascendant and my first house lord. In doing so, there's a strategy behind this. I wanted to see how Neptune would play out in my life on those very significant and key points in my chart. Astrology is 50% reading books and doing courses and getting mentors and teachers, and the other 50% is observation and experience of the planets in your life. So the older you get, the more wisdom, the more knowledge that you will have about how planets impact us. So now that I've gone through those particular transits of Neptune in my first house, I feel that I'm ready to talk more in depth about this very watery planet. So let's start by having a look at what Neptune is all about astronomically. So Neptune comes after Uranus in the order of the planets. We have Mercury, Venus, the Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, boom, Neptune. Second to last of the key players in astrology. Pluto is still considered to be a planet of influence in astrological circles, and therefore Neptune is the second last. Now, when Neptune was discovered, it wasn't through observation. They didn't sort of spot Neptune in the sky and go, aha, there it is, because you actually need a telescope to see Neptune. It's not something you can observe with the naked eye. And so Neptune was discovered through mathematics. Basically, the astrologers of the time when Neptune was discovered, and we're going to talk about that when Neptune was discovered in just a minute, but the astrologers of the time were observing Uranus, and they had mathematically predicted where Uranus was going to go according to all their observations, and then Uranus did his usual quirky thing and did not follow the predicted orbit. And so from that, they were able to calculate that there must be a planet further out that's pulling on Neptune, and its gravitational force has caused it to move in a different way than we expected or anticipated. And so because of their mathematical calculations, they began to look for another planet beyond Uranus. And voila, we have Neptune. Now, what is very interesting, and this is quite telling about the character of Neptune actually as well, what is very interesting is that Galileo had observed Neptune back in 1612. He didn't realize that Neptune was a planet. I don't know what he thought it was, but he didn't sort of put two and two together and think, there's another planet out there. So Galileo had observed Neptune, and this was a whole 234 years before the discovery of Neptune. Now, why I say this correlates to sort of the ambiguous nature of Neptune is that he's a bit slippery as a planet. It's hard to sort of pin down. So here was Galileo observing Neptune, not realizing what he was, not sort of seeing it for what it was, basically sort of under an illusion that Neptune was something else. That is a very Neptunian quality, which we'll talk about very soon. But 234 years later, we had the discovery of Neptune in the real through that mathematical observation that I was talking about. This was in 1846. Now, most people know that when we discover new planets, there is often a rise in consciousness or an increase in conscious awareness in humanity on the Earth at the time of the discovery of a new planet. For example, when Uranus was discovered, we had a number of revolutions occurring around the world. What does Uranus correlate to? It correlates to freedom, liberation, equality, and equal distribution of resources. And what were these revolutions about all around the world? Well, namely, the French Revolution was occurring when Uranus was discovered. And that was about no more let them eat cake kind of stuff, no more of the aristocracy living in opulent luxury beyond compare, while the poor people of the land went hungry and could barely clothe and feed themselves. And of course, Uranus, sorry to diverge off Neptune, but Uranus is all about those things, equality. And so the conscious awareness of the planet had reached a point where it was like, no, now hang on, we're not going to take this inequality anymore. We want things to be fairer. We want things to be more even. And lo and behold, at the discovery of Uranus, which rules those things, the consciousness was ripe and ready to embrace that as part of its awareness. Now, the same occurs with Neptune, who was discovered a little while after, as I said, in 1846. So what was the expansion of consciousness that occurred at the time Neptune was discovered? Well, we had an invention of photography that had occurred sort of 20 years before. Now, when we're talking about these big planetary discoveries, this is no mediocre discovery. This is really kick-ass stuff. And so we look at the surrounding sort of, 20, 30 years as an era of the discovery of Neptune. Keep in mind, when I'm talking about this, that up until the discovery of Uranus in the late 1700s, there had the existence of planets beyond what you could see with the naked eye was not known, was not proven. And so for thousands of years, the consciousness of humanity had been in a state where it was only aware of what it could see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. In the real, in the earthly dimension. If you couldn't see beyond Saturn, then there were no planets beyond Saturn. And then all of a sudden, at the discovery of Uranus, boom, we have an awareness of more. And so Uranus was discovered, and then Neptune was discovered. And so the surrounding sort of 30 odd years in the vicinity of 1846 when Neptune was discovered are Neptunian times. And so we look at what was unfolding in consciousness then. And as I've just said a moment ago, photography. Photography was discovered. Neptune rules photography. Motion pictures were discovered 30 years or so after the discovery of Neptune. And Neptune rules motion pictures. The spiritualist movements were unfolding around the world. We started to find people who were interested in sort of hypnosis and mesmerism, people who would be, looking at channeling, people who wanted to conduct seances. These sorts of things started to come into vogue as parlor games, as did the tarot card readings and even astrological readings as sort of, like I said, parlor games, entertainment at fancy people's dinner parties and so on. That was the very glamorous side of Neptunian times, using those spiritualist things as entertainments for glamorous people. Plastics were discovered around this time. Braille for the blind, writing for the blind. Antiseptics. Pasteurization was discovered and started to be used. And these are just a few of the advancements that occurred in society around the time that Neptune was discovered. We also had cultural movements like Romanticism, the poets, Byron and Shelley around this time as well. We had, alongside Byron and Shelley, we had things like the Frankenstein novel or the Dracula novel, which is a very interesting thing. Impressionism was also the painting style en vogue around this era of history. And we also had the Communist Manifesto that was written. Now, some people, if you're not familiar with politics, the name communism can conjure up all sorts of negative imagery in your head. But the idea behind communism was a bit like Uranus in that it was about equality and compassion to everybody. So these are combinations of both Uranian themes, which is equality, and sort of an even playing field for everybody. And also Neptune, which is highly compassionate, wanting everybody to get an opportunity. And of course, Neptune, for those who we haven't got to this point yet, but Neptune rules idealism as well. So the ideal of the Communist Manifesto was present in these Neptunian times as well. Whether it actually functioned and worked was another matter, but the ideal was there. A utopian vision for society is what Neptune is all about, and so there's no surprise that we had movements in that direction towards that ideal at this time. Back to the astronomy, Neptune is a planet that's made up of liquid and ice. And it's also full of different gases as well. So it's quite a combination, Neptune, of many things. But it's very similar in its size and its structure to its nearest planet, which is Uranus. They're almost twin-like in many senses, even though they function very differently astrologically. Like Uranus, Neptune is actually circled by some very faint rings of dust. Uranus's rings are more visible, but Neptune does have rings as well, very light, very faint rings around Neptune. If you've seen images of Neptune that were taken, I think it was by the Voyager space probe, I may be wrong there, but if memory serves me, I think it was Voyager that took images of Neptune, you'll know that it's this beautiful, serene, blue-looking planet that has some wafting sort of white, they look like clouds, around it occasionally. And despite its very serene-looking surface, it is quite a wild planet underneath. So again, that illusionary factor there. On the surface, it looks like it's cool, calm, collected, and underneath, it's not what it seems. On Neptune, winds whip around the planet at, I have to read this, 2,100 kilometers an hour, and they're furious winds. Not only that, Neptune takes only 16 hours to do a rotation. It's heaps bigger than Earth, Neptune, lots bigger than Earth. And we take 24 hours as an Earth to rotate. But if you're a monstrous sized planet and you're spinning, doing a circuit of 16 hours, then the gravitational pull of Neptune becomes pretty phenomenal, despite the fact that you're mostly made up of gas. So this momentum of the gravitational force from the spin and the winds that whip around Neptune sort of whips up all the ice, methane, hydrogen, helium, and ammonia. Had to read that list to make sure I got the chemicals right. Whips it all up into a big slushy mess. So it's not this pure ethereal kind of atmosphere or body of Neptune. It's actually a bit of a slushy, wild mess when you get down to it. Now, some scientists, and this is very interesting, some scientists have hypothesized, just through their calculations and observations, that the core of Neptune, which is burning iron, very fiery, very hot core, they have hypothesized that there is a layer of diamond, liquid diamond, that encircles the core of Neptune. Now, just how they've reached that conclusion, don't ask me, but it is there in scientific journals that this is a hypothesis that could prove true and correct. Now, this iron core that's burning hot, white hot iron core, is actually bigger than the Earth. So the core, the solid mass, if you like, of Neptune is larger than the Earth, and it burns at about, or its temperature is about 5,000 degrees Celsius. So it's incredibly hot, even though it's so far from the sun and distant from the sun's rays, which is usually where heat comes from in the solar system. This Neptune has its own heat source through this burning iron core. So you're getting the picture? We have this impression of Neptune, of serenity on the outside astronomically, but not quite what it seems deep down. And again, we'll see that represented when we start talking about the astrology of Neptune and how it impacts us, and therefore how it's going to impact us when it travels through each house. We also can see that it is a very fluid type planet. It's, slushy, slippery, and of course Neptune rules the watery depths of the ocean, if you're familiar with mythology and the title of Neptune. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. I love the analogy that we're seeing here of this watery fluid planet, but it has a solidness at the core and a preciousness, the liquid diamond. There's something precious at the core of Neptune. Now, Neptune, as we've already stated, is invisible. You cannot see Neptune out on a fine stargazing night. You will always need a telescope to see Neptune. And as the old Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below. The way things appear in the sky from our vantage point on Earth is exactly how they will play out and be represented and reflected in our lives on the planet. What does that mean? Well, it means that the planets we can see with the naked eye, the visible planets, in astrology, they correlate and connect to what we experience visibly, tangibly, experientially on the Earth. Our touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. You know, the physical things of the experience of being a body incarnate on the Earth connect to visible planets and what they rule. When you get to Neptune, actually when you get to Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, they're all invisible without a telescope, and therefore they connect to the inner realm of the psyche, what motivates us unconsciously, you know, our behavioral patterns, our things we can't help about ourselves, you know, our deep psychological wounds and our karmas that we carry with us at the core of our self, at our soul level. They correspond to these invisible planets because as above, so below. We can't see them, therefore it's like the part of the iceberg that sits underneath the water. You can't see it, but it's still there packing a whopping punch, especially if you happen to be on the Titanic. So Neptune has at least 14 moons that circle it. It has a greater and denser gravity than the Earth. So if you're standing on Neptune, you will weigh a lot more than you do on the Earth. And it takes longer than one lifetime for Neptune to circle the sun. It takes 165 years. So in your lifetime, you will never see Neptune return to its natal place in your astrological chart. You just won't live that long, at least not in this day and age as I'm recording this video. Who knows what science might do in the future, but right now you won't live to be 165 and see Neptune come back to its natal position. Let's explore Neptune mythologically now. Well, Neptune is the name of the Roman god of the sea. Not only the sea though, in the oceans, but also of freshwater. Neptune was the Roman god of freshwater as well. And we often see Neptune in mythological pictorial representation with his trident. And of course, what is the symbol of Neptune astrologically? It's a trident. So there we go. There's so much correlation between the mythologies and what plays out in the skies again here. So again, there's no coincidences that when the astronomers discovered Neptune, they didn't know that it was made mostly of liquid and gas. They didn't know it was mostly a fluid planet. But lo and behold, here we are. They gave it the name Neptune, king of the oceans, and Neptune is quite an oceanic planet with its liquid mass. Once again, this is showing us how the conscious awareness works, even in unconscious ways. Now, a little bit more about Neptune mythologically was that he was the son of the Titan god Saturn. Now, along with Neptune, there was Jupiter and there was Pluto that were the sons of Saturn. And Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto didn't really get along with Saturn very well. If you're familiar with the mythology of Saturn and Jupiter, you'll know that the mother of Jupiter hid him away because Saturn had a habit of eating his children lest they rise up against him and take over. So theoretically, in the mythology, Neptune and Pluto were gobbled up by their father Saturn. But then along came Jupiter when he was all grown up to the rescue, and Saturn regurgitated his offspring, Neptune and Pluto. There were others as well, but the main ones were Neptune and Pluto, the brothers of Jupiter. And together, Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto overthrew their father Saturn, and Jupiter became king of the gods. And we had the reign of the Olympian gods from that point on, which include Neptune and Pluto. So Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto are the Olympian gods. Saturn was the Titan god. And Uranus, who was the father of Saturn, just to confuse matters even further, was not a Titan and not an Olympian. He was sort of one of the forefathers of them all. In ancient Greece and Rome, they celebrated the role of water in their lives, and they had a festival to celebrate this, and it was known as Neptunalia. There was also another festival that occurred at the similar time called Ferinalia. I won't go into the mythology of that name, but they were both celebrated around the same time. So July 23rd and July 25th, the role of water and the preciousness of water in life was celebrated with these festivals. So Neptunalia, it was a time of honoring the god Neptune and its watery association. So let's take a peek at the astrology of Neptune. I'm going to tell you all about Neptune astrologically. What is Neptune about? Well, as we've already come across, Neptune is about illusion, seeing something and actually realizing it's something else. It's not what it seems. So that can be a number of things can be displayed that way. Glamour is ruled by Neptune, because if you're glamorous, you've got amazing makeup and hair and beautiful, shimmering, gorgeous clothes and stuff. You look very glamorous, but is that who you really are? When you wake up in bed in the morning, and your hair's a tousled mess and you haven't got makeup on and you're wearing your baggy old t-shirt, you might not look glamorous. So glamour is ruled by Neptune because it's part of that deception, if you like, but not a bad deception. It's just a deception. It's not what it seems. Neptune, in that sense, rules glamour. Neptune, as we've already discussed, rules a desire to return to utopia, to achieve utopia, to create heaven on earth, so to speak. So that can be a very positive thing if we're wanting to make the world a better place. And Neptune is also quite a compassionate planet. There is a lot of unconditional love that goes along with Neptune, brotherly love, the idea of anyone can be saved from their horrible life or their difficulties or their own ill choices in life. Neptune has this sort of unconditional love. Some might refer to that as this redeemer quality about it. And Neptune can be connected to miracles as well, because if somebody is raised up from the muck and mire into a wonderful life, well, that is often seen as a miracle. And that transformation that occurs is a very Neptunian associated thing in astrology. Part of this desire for utopia can actually have connections to a longing to escape the horror and the harshness of earthly reality. And those of us who are very Neptunian, who have a strong Neptune in our chart, or even a strong 12th house or a strong Pisces, will know what this is all about. The wanting to escape from earth and earth realities because they're too hard to bear. They're fearful. Earth is a fearful place for these highly sensitive Neptunian, Piscean, 12th house souls, and it's almost too hard. So Neptune is also associated with tremendous longing to tap out, to escape, a longing to go to heaven. Now, you'll see a lot of religious groups, fanatical religious groups going down this road where it doesn't matter what I endure in this lifetime, I will be rewarded when I go to heaven. And that's all they're living for. They don't even engage in earthly reality and earthly life because it's only about heaven and getting to heaven after this horrible life is over. That's a Neptunian thing. Also, Neptune has this idea about it of wanting to return to the watery depths, i.e. the womb, being in the embryonic fluid, being safe and secure, not having to sort of struggle and make it on our own because, hey, we've got everything we need. We're warm, we're safe, we're fed, we're in the womb. And Neptune has this desire for that too. So it's a dual desire for paradise, heaven, but also at the same time a desire to, return to the safety and security of home, so to speak. Neptune can also give a longing to be saved. You want your hero to come along and rescue you from this, terrible existence. That's a Neptunian longing. But also, if we find that we desire to be the rescuer, we want to be somebody's hero, that's a Neptunian thing as well. So there's often a spiritual connection with Neptune, and I'm sure from what I've just described, you can see connections in religious circles to savior mentality, redeemer qualities, longing for paradise. You can see where Neptune's getting its sort of shadow side of spirituality popping up there in religious, ideology. But Neptune is also in the positive side which I love to talk about more, is the beautiful connection to angelic realms, to the divine. So if we channel higher wisdom, higher knowledge, that's a Neptune thing. If we're channeling creativity, beauty, art, if we're channeling unconditional love. And now I'm talking about channeling here, not in the sort of, some entity speaking through me, although that is a Neptunian thing. I'm talking about simply expressing things that come from beyond us. Beautiful things, gracious things, ethereal things, things that come from beyond the earthly plane. That spiritual side of Neptune is so beautiful. So Neptune is the manifestation of divine love, divine grace, and divine creativity, divine creative ideals. He is connected to visualization, imagination, and even healing through visualization and imagination. The idea that through your thought processes and lifting them to a higher plane, dreaming and aspiring of what it could be, that you can heal yourself. And again, we come back to the miraculous component here, where people are miraculously healed. Neptune has connections to hypnosis as well, and mesmerism. In fact, Mesmer was the man who developed the idea of being hypnotized as a form of healing. So the two are very similar. And so Neptune has connections with this as well. It's all very interesting, but Neptune is actually a planet that it's hard to define him, and I use the word him loosely, as a masculine planet. Now, Neptune as a god was a masculine god, but the expression of Neptune is actually very feminine. It errs on the feminine side. So it would be very interesting to understand exactly how they reached the concept in ancient mythology that Neptune, the god of the oceans, was actually a man. I feel maybe that came about at the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans, when the patriarchy was establishing itself, because really the expression of Neptune is this compassionate, unconditionally loving, highly creative energy, which connects more to the water signs and the watery energy, which is feminine in astrology. So very interesting there. Neptune is a more feminine energy expression. Neptune rules the sign of Pisces in modern astrology, and of course that is a water sign as well. Neptune is also in astrology neither benefic nor malefic. So that means, we don't put a label of good or bad on him. But really with Neptune, it depends what aspects you have to your placement of Neptune in the chart, whether he will manifest his shadow side or whether he will manifest his light side in your life. And we've kind of talked a little bit about both here now. I will talk further about the shadow side in just a second. But if you have mostly good aspects, like a conjunction, we can classify that as a good aspect, or perhaps a trine or a sextile to Neptune from other planets, then it's looking good for you. Neptune will tend to express in its more angelic form. It's more miraculous, blessed form. But if you have quite a mixed bag, maybe you've got some squares to your Neptune, maybe you've got some oppositions to your Neptune. If that's what it's looking like, then you may end up with a bit more of the shadow side exhibiting in your personality or what you attract in your life. Let's explore what that is all about. Well, some of the shadow side of Neptune is in the desire for utopia. We want to see evil people punished. And you'll see this a lot expressing in religions, where we just want everyone who's bad to go to hell. And that's actually a shadow Neptunian energy, because we want to preserve utopia for the pure, and everyone else can suffer, So that's a shadow side expression of Neptune. Narcissism can be connected with Neptune's shadow side as well. And so can masochism, actually. If we think about this desire to be seen as holy and pure, often that connects to making ourselves falsely humble and lower than another person. And that can incite in another person distaste, and disgust for another person who is falsely humble. And of course, if you're familiar with the idea of masochism, then you know that it's about debasing yourself in order that you might feel more worthy or more holy because you've made yourself lowly. It's a very slippery, shall we say, concept. And again, not everything is as it seems. It might seem with someone who is in a masochist state that they don't care about themselves, that they don't love themselves, that they're being cruel to themselves. But very often under the surface is this energy of wanting, the best way I can describe it, to be pure through making yourself lowly, like the flagellants did in ancient medieval times through whipping themselves. Oh, they're so pure and holy because they're whipping themselves for Christ. You know, it's that kind of idea. Odd one, but not everything is as it seems with Neptune and Neptune's shadow side. Projection is something that is actually a Neptunian behavioral quality coming from this psychological depth. If we have separation anxiety, that's a shadow side of Neptune. Of course it is, because we are longing to return to the womb. And when we're separate from that safe space, separation anxiety. So if you're looking at those psychological issues in a chart and, assessing that, look at Neptune and what Neptune's doing in the chart. Shadow side of Neptune can be idealization, where we don't see a person clearly for who they are, but we put them on a pedestal. So celebrity culture would be one expression of that. Anyone we put on a pedestal and hold up there, and we create an illusion around that person. It's not the truth. It's not real. It's not what is really going on at the core of a person, to have them up on a pedestal and think that, oh my God, they're so perfect. That's idealization, and that's Neptune shadow side, as is hysteria, as is addiction. Addiction's another expression here. And why? Because addiction is escapism. If we're addicted to drugs, usually with Neptune involved, it's because we want to get away from the harshness of reality. If we're addicted to alcohol, again, it's an escape mechanism and it's an escape valve, but not a healthy one, because reality is too harsh and we just long to get out of here. Obviously, deception is a shadow side of Neptune, because if you're creating an illusion, while there can be sort of times when that's good, as in the case of glamour and that's fun and what have you, sometimes when we are creating an illusion, we're deceiving others. We're pulling the wool over their eyes. We're not being our true self, and that is a shadow Neptune expression. Sacrifice, I would say, is a shadow Neptunian expression. Again, it comes in close context with this false humility kind of behavior. If we feel that we have to sacrifice ourselves for another person, then we're kind of making ourselves to be better than the other person. I'll go in, I'll sacrifice myself, and then that person will be saved. And there's a false humility about it, a deceptive humility that goes along with that. And of course, oftentimes when people have strong Neptune representations in the chart, they lose themselves, they martyr themselves for the sake of another. Does that benefit their life? No, usually. But it might make them feel spiritually greater, or that they have been a noble person. Again, we've got this sacrifice energy that's a bit not what it seems, and this is also the shadow side of Neptune. Victimization. Victimization is another Neptunian energy, where poor me, I am suffering because life has been unkind, and therefore I am longing to get away from life, and return to the womb or go to paradise because I have been victimized. Instead of being our own savior, instead of making the best of things and doing what we can to transform our karma, no, we're a victim and we just want to escape. That's so Neptunian shadow side. Especially, you could call it suffering that's seen as purity. So these are some of the Neptunian shadow energies. I don't want to leave it on that though. There are good things, obviously, that Neptune correlates to. We've talked about some of these, but, others might be the belief that there is enough for everybody, and that the universe can be kind and the universe has our back. In fact, transcendence of matter is a very big Neptunian theme. The belief that eventually good will win over evil. That's Neptunian as well. Jesus' teachings were very Neptunian. He was, after all, the avatar for the age of Pisces, which was ruled by Neptune. So compassion, unconditional love. We've talked about that. Forgiveness, healing, all these things, divine healing, miraculous healing. These are Neptunian ruled things. So Jesus was a big representation of Neptune energy in the positive. The most creative and artistic planet, we've already talked about that. And it's actually at its strongest capacity in water signs. So Neptune does very well in Pisces, Cancer, or Scorpio. She will tend to give the best results if that's where he is in your natal chart, but also if that's where he's transiting at any given time, he's going to give the better side of himself to you. Neptune rules the color light blue. Hence, I have my blue blouse on here today for this video, but I've also worn my very well, you might not be able to see it because the color in this camera doesn't actually come up that good. I need to get a new camera, but it's actually a very beautiful velvet jacket that's ocean color, like the kind of tranquil turquoise that we see up on the beaches of Queensland or some beautiful tropical beaches. And I thought, seeing as Neptune rules these gorgeous oceans, I would wear my beautiful aqua turquoise color velvet jacket with my light blue Neptunian top. Neptune can also have connections to lavender, purpley colors also. Hence, we see often people who work in spiritual, sort of new agey fields have a lot of purple going on, because often they might not be aware of this even, but they're probably highly Neptunian people. They have a strong Neptune in their chart, and so the purple element tends to come through quite a lot, and you'll see a lot of, websites and stuff with purple this and lavender that on many spiritual sites. Neptune rules the gemstone amethyst as well, and so amethyst has a lot of qualities to it that correlate very strongly to Neptune. Some tangible things, and I did say in the beginning Neptune's more psychological. Yep, that's true, very true, but Neptune does have some governance of certain items on the planet, namely because of what was happening at the time Neptune was discovered, what things were starting to be used and utilized when Neptune was discovered, and therefore Neptune gets the rulership of those things. So the ocean, obviously, but oils, plastics, impressionism, film, photography, advertising, poisons, escapism, that's not actually a tangible thing, but that's obviously something Neptune rules, drugs. As I've already illustrated, a lot of these things were being discovered. Film, photography, medications, the shipping industry, steam-powered ships were really starting to get a Guernsey around the time that Neptune came along. So shipping and the oceans, all of these things, highly Neptunian. Now, in my level 1 astrology course that is coming out, you can learn more about Neptune and the things Neptune rules, and we go into greater depth with Neptune there and its rulerships. So if you're interested in knowing more, check out that course. But what does Neptune want? It wants unwavering trust, unwavering love, and unwavering belief that the divine will come through for you. Even in the face of no evidence at all, Neptune wants us to believe. If you are 40 odd years old and you've never had a boyfriend, Neptune is saying, keep believing and the miracle can happen. And I would encourage you, if that's the case, well, wait till you're 42. Who knows? Neptune, when it reaches its maturation at 42, may just bring you what you've been waiting for. So that's a short look at the beautiful and quite intriguing and unusual planet of Neptune. Now let's have a look at what Neptune is all about when he travels through a house in the horoscope and what he's going to do for you while he's there. So how do we determine if Neptune is transiting through our 12th house? Well, one of the first places you should go is to an app such as planetwatcher.com, where you can find out what sign Neptune is currently transiting. Go to that app and look for the trident symbol or glyph, and that is where Neptune is, and find what sign it correlates to. If you're not familiar with sign symbols, this is the sign symbol. These rather are the sign symbols here on the astro wheel. So as you can see, Cancer is this particular glyph, Leo this particular glyph. So hopefully that helps you determine which sign the Neptune glyph, the trident, is in currently at any point in time. When you know that, then you are empowered to find out which particular house in whole sign astrology Neptune is transiting through. Now, in the case of the 12th house, you will need to see that Neptune is transiting through the 12th house from your ascendant or rising sign. Now, I'm going to use the illustration here of Neptune being in the sign of Pisces. If we have Aries rising sun or moon, this puts Neptune in the 12th house, because when we count from Aries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's where Neptune may be at any given point, transiting through the sign of Pisces. And that's how we determine which house Neptune's currently transiting through in whole sign astrology. What does this mean? What is the 12th house all about? It's a house of spirituality. It's a house of mysticism, not just religion. In fact, it's far from religion. It's the higher octave of religious practice, let's say. It's creativity. It's healing. So healing that comes from the divine. It can be magical healing, mystical healing, divine healing, healing that's ahead of its time even, healing that comes from other realms to us in our human embodiment. Creativity that comes from other realms to us in our human embodiment. The inspiration that we get from maybe our higher self. The inspiration that we perhaps get from our ancestors giving us messages, or from divine beings sending thoughts, sending creative juices through our body. It's also the house of past lives and, as I've just said, our ancestors, where they are trying to get messages through to us from the beyond, from other realms. It's a house of escapism, running away from mundane, ordinary reality to the spiritual, to the creative, where we can immerse ourselves in something beyond the cleaning the toilet, the cooking the dinner, the vacuuming the lounge room. We get beyond those ordinary, everyday, mundane situations in the 12th house. The 12th house is longing for more than this, more than the mundane, more than the physical, more than the everyday, ordinary things that we experience. Because as we know, opposite the 12th house is the 6th house of the mundane, of the everyday, of the duties, of the requirements of everyday living. The 12th house is beyond that. It's the opposite of that. It's the longing for connection to the divine, for fantasy to become reality, for idealism. Interestingly enough, the 12th house has to do with the gestation period as well, and we can often find out a little bit about our pre-birth condition through looking at the planets in the 12th house, or the planets ruling the 12th house, or the sign of the 12th house, just for people who want to know about that. The planets and the sign of the 12th house are indicative of our deep ancestry as a soul as well, much greater than just ourselves in this incarnation. As individuals, like for example, you may have Jupiter in your 12th house, and that might be an indicator that you have this divine ancestral spiritual wisdom flowing through you that is accessible should you wish to tap into that. Some people deny their ancestry, energetic ancestry I'm talking about here, and they walk away from it. We've seen that play out in the physical as well, where people walk away from their ancestral line physically and say, I'm having nothing to do with my family anymore. So we can do that spiritually as well. But that's what the 12th house has connections to, our ancestry of a spiritual or ethereal nature from our past lives. So check out your 12th house. You might find that it's a very interesting journey once you start digging into the rulerships, the sign, or the planets in the 12th house. So how does this then correlate to the 14-year transit of Neptune through this very spiritual center of the horoscope? Also, I need to point out, Neptune is very at home here. This is Neptune's territory. Neptune's got its feet on solid ground, so to speak, if Neptune could have its feet on solid ground, here in the 12th house. Pisces, 12th house, Neptune all link up together very strongly. Well, the element of longing of the 12th house, that longing for more than the mundane, more than what is, longing to even return to paradise or to the pre-birth state or to maybe a utopic childhood experience. Well, this is amplified with Neptune being in the 12th house. You hunger for that state of peace and that state of unity. Hunger for paradise, whatever that looks like to you. I remember when I had this transit not so long ago, I was very much in a state of, I want to go to heaven. I'm so tired of being on earth, I just want to go to heaven. And I was in a very religious state when I had this transit, so a religious situation in life. So that was where my mental processes with this went. But the longing was very real, a desire for utopia. So you may feel that. Now, often we see people escaping reality because the longing becomes too much with Neptune transiting here. And that can be one of the reasons why people run away from their duties and responsibilities, because they are longing for a break from that, for release from that, for just the state of ethereal being and oneness with the universe. What about the pre-birth or ancestral state of the 12th house when Neptune is transiting there? Well, you can receive mystical revelations during this transit about your ancient lineage. The messages from the divine might come through that remind you of who you are. Now, obviously, this may not be fully in your conscious awareness. We have to be very high-level spiritual people to link these synchronicities up and to realize and know who we are. So it might mean, you do a past life regression to understand your past lives, and then you start to see the symbology playing out in your everyday life, where you recognize that higher spiritual self or that other being or that other lifetime that you've had coming through in your reality now. But mystical revelations can do that as well during Neptune's transit here, and I would encourage you to do past life regression work while Neptune is transiting here for sure. So even though it might not be fully in your conscious awareness, you might be afraid of doing regression work. It would be very sad because it's an amazing healing tool. But people can be very afraid of it. I was before I undertook regression work. But even if you're not into doing past life regression work, you may find that during this transit, for example, you might be drawn to go visit a little medieval village in the hills of Bulgaria or something. And you go there and, it's a very beautiful experience for you. It's an uplifting experience. It's a heartfelt experience for some reason, and you can't explain why. It may be that the powers beyond our reality here on Earth are drawing you back to a place where you spent your ancestry or a past life, or in some way this place was significant to you beyond your conscious awareness in this lifetime. So don't be surprised if you have a lot of experiences that may be goosebump experiences like that during this 14-year transit. Now also your ancestors, even your higher self, might be trying to connect with you in your dreams, give you messages, give you guidance perhaps through your dreams. So pay attention to your dreams. Get a dream journal, write in it every day. Use this energy to your advantage. Having greater mental access to our past lives is also a thing, and therefore, again, I reiterate, getting a past life regression is a great thing to do with this transit because you're more attuned to receiving the information. Even your daydreams might be taking you to places that maybe perhaps correlate to past life experiences. Your daydreams can be much older than this incarnation that you're currently in. So let's say you're fantasizing about restoring a chateau in France, and you really go into that zone while Neptune's transiting your 12th house and you just daydream about it all the time. Well, you may actually be tapping into a past life experience or a past life longing, a past life aspiration as you daydream about restoring that chateau in France and having a YouTube channel. I watch a lot of those. Who knows? Maybe I had a chateau in France in a past life. Souls from your past lives may actually show up now when Neptune transits the 12th house. They might come into your life to tie up loose ends from the past. Maybe you need to settle an old score. Maybe you need to work out some old issues with a former marriage partner from a past life. Or maybe you had a sad experience with a child and you need to rectify that now in this lifetime and bring joy with that soul into your life. So, there's a million ways that could manifest, but this is a thing. During Neptune's transit of the 12th house, we can meet with people from past lives. I got married when Neptune was transiting my 12th house, and I married a man who I know full well has been present in many lifetimes, and we obviously had some connection to sort out. Maybe we had a deal in the ethereal realms that would get together and do XYZ in this lifetime. And lo and behold, we did. Now, whether you believe that or not, that's entirely up to you, but there are ways to see that in astrological charts, whether you actually have a karmic connection with a partner, with a child, with a friend. These things are very obvious in synastry. And so you may encounter people that you have tremendous karmic synastry with, and you're there with a reason. Look, that doesn't mean that these connections are going to be lifelong. My marriage was not. But we had this bond that we needed to go through, tie up loose ends, deal with whatever, help one another grow in some soul way. Whatever it was that we came together to do. We did it, it was done, and we moved on. And so don't expect that, these people that come into your lives are there permanently. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But everyone you encounter during this 14-year period is likely to be teaching your soul something for the purposes of its growth. And there very well may be a karmic connection tied up with that also. Now, escapism is a big 12th house thing. What does this mean when Neptune is moving here? Well, we have a compulsion. We have a compulsion to escape maybe through a negative means, through drugs or addictions or something. We might be escaping through the gym every night. We're addicted to it. We go to the gym and we get our stress out, and it's almost a bit too much. There are ways that we can be escaping that are healthy and unhealthy, and these may be very appealing now. We can also escape through fantasy, because the 12th house is a very fantasy-oriented house. So we might find that we are constantly dressing up as a way of escaping our mundane reality. I was involved in the rockabilly scene during Neptune's transit of my 12th house, and that was a way to escape the ordinariness of my life. You might escape to the country because the stress and the bustle of city life is just not fulfilling you. So that's another way. And you go to this fantasy cottage where I'm going to grow my own veggies and all that sort of stuff. And you go into that kind of realm. That can be a bit of escapism through a fantasy ideal of what life should look like. You might escape through reading more fantasy novels or watching more Lord of the Rings films. Going into that fantasy escapism is a big draw card during this time. A lot of people, when they go through Neptune in the 12th house, actually find it appealing to become something of a hermit or a recluse, because this is actually a very Piscean 12th house Neptunian state of being. To be the loner. Now, we all like to belong. We like to have friends. But then there is also this big pull. If we have a strong 12th house Pisces or Neptune in our charts, we have a pull to be by ourselves, to regenerate our emotions, to just find our feet, to commune with the divine. There's nothing wrong with being a bit of a loner and a bit of a hermit, and I will vouch for that. It's certainly my state of existence as a very strong Pisces person. But Neptune in the 12th house can trigger that desire to go off and be in the woods, like, who was it? Thoreau, I believe. I could have that wrong, but yeah, to go off and be alone in the woods and be the hermit for a time when Neptune is in the 12th house. And that's part of the escapism. Now, we can also escape in other beautiful ways, like holidaying overseas during this transit, enjoying day spas or retreats in some manner. Of course, this is lovely. So you might find, if you're not being a hermit or a recluse, you might regularly indulge in escaping in that manner through trips, through travel, especially over water or to the ocean. You might escape in other means as well, by having time spent in a hospital or a prison. Maybe even an ashram or a monastery might be appealing now. Not just for negative reasons either, to go to the prison or the hospital or, go join a monastery because our heart is broken or something. But perhaps we might actually do charity work in those places. And we spend a lot of time there, helping cheer up people in a hospital, or teach a skill to people in a prison, or, working with some charity work with a monastery. So these kinds of things are also big draw cards as a means of escaping the ordinary. For some people, and remember there is a shadow side to Neptune, for some people this in combination, this transit with other transits that might be occurring to the natal chart, can sometimes trigger a nervous breakdown where you are required to tap out from society, from ordinary life, because you're not coping. and because you haven't been able to manage. So that does happen. We see that happening a lot in the Western world, where the stress of modern living is just too much. So have compassion to people who are going through that. And some people, maybe for a reason like that, or for other reasons, maybe more benevolent reasons, may find that they don't actually even have to work during Neptune's transit of the 12th house, and they don't have to participate in mundane, ordinary life in some way. Maybe you're a woman who marries a wealthy man, or you suddenly come into some situation in life where you don't have to work. Maybe you and your partner create a business that goes so well, you can actually put your feet up for a bit and let the business run itself. And you don't have to work any longer. You hand it over to a manager, you live in the lap of luxury. That would be a tapping out of mainstream ordinary existence where there's a battle for survival. And wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't we all wish for that? Well, Neptune through the 12th house for some people can give that. Some people tap out through this nervous breakdown I just described. Some people might tap out from mundane, ordinary life through some benevolent means. It all depends on your natal chart, other transits going on, and Neptune's interaction with those. Another way that we can tap out, and that's very strong during this 12th house transit of Neptune, is through turning inward. In fact, we're required to turn more inward during this time, to sort of go into our own soul peace and stillness and happiness. So we might actually detach from ordinary, mundane struggle street by finding our joy within us, celebrating each day, being grateful, being in a spiritual plane of bliss despite the circumstances of life. That is obviously a very high manifestation of Neptune in escapism. Now, the 12th house is also mysticism or spiritualism here in the 12th house, and so we may find that we discover a new spiritual path for ourselves with Neptune moving through here. And maybe we go to a higher plane, a higher level of understanding about our spiritual lives and who we are as beings incarnate on the earth. It was during Neptune's transit of my 12th house that the blinkers fell off for me about astrology. Now, I didn't fully immerse myself in the new ideologies that I now adhere to, but it was a slow infiltrating process, as Neptune does. And I discovered the first step in the process was to discover that astrology was not the evil thing I'd been taught to believe growing up. And that was the first step forward in changing my whole attachment to spirituality and what spirituality is. And it's gone through a complete 180-degree turnaround since, but it began during Neptune's transit of my 12th house. Some people might retreat from relationships in order to connect with spirit during this transit. Now, that doesn't mean that relationships aren't supported or you're going to get divorced or anything like that, but you are going through a transit that might be very different to your partner, and so you might start to get involved in spiritual things while your partner does not. And so there's not a moving away from relationship, but an involvement, a separation of spirit perhaps in a partnership that can occur during this. And again, the retreating from relationships in order to connect with spirit, we often see with that desire to be a loner or to be a hermit in order to commune with spirit. Many people involved in Buddhism will do such things. They move away from a relationship in order to spend, a year in an ashram or a year on a Tibetan hillside meditating. These kinds of things are not unheard of with Neptune transiting the 12th house. And of course, because of this, there is great potential to connect with the divine in very blissful ways, to really bliss out for 14 years maybe. Wouldn't that be nice? That's a nice manifestation of this energy, to find little bit by little bit as the transit goes on, you are blissing out more and more and more in your connection with spirit and tapping out of the ordinary, mundane, everyday. Higher consciousness can be the result of this transit, where you come out a transformed being, a whole different person. You're actually glowing because you have connected with your higher self, with spirit, with the divine, with other entities and beings throughout this 14-year period. And you come out with a great deal more higher consciousness than you began this transit with. You also have tremendous access to the unconscious mind. Again, a good reason for doing past life regression work, but also a wonderful trigger to connect with spirit in new, deep, and very profound ways. mystical experiences, meditation, contemplation, they all flow easily now to us. We can do it without a struggle. I do find meditating quite a hard thing to do. I think maybe I have a false idea in my head of what it actually should look like. I think really it's just like praying. But to sort of still the mind, I find hard to do. But during a Neptune transit of the 12th house, you might find that that happens very easily for you, and you can calm the mind and just go into that state of oneness much easier than you were able to when Neptune was transiting your 11th house before. Now, obviously, there's a shadow side to this as well. And we see this in religion, where we find people sort of set themselves up as a bit of a savior for others. When we do that, it can lead to martyrdom, and the 12th house is very tied to the idea of being a martyr for others. I mean, the whole Jesus thing, that is a very 12th house energy. Jesus' teachings were very Piscean, very 12th house. That's why he's often, Christianity or Christ followers often use the symbol of the fish. They don't know that they're referring to Pisces there, but that's what's going on. Jesus was the avatar for the Piscean age. And of course, Jesus, in the story according to Christians, martyred himself and took on the sins of the world for everybody else. Now, that's the Christian interpretation of what went on, but we see that martyrdom element very strong there. And then, of course, we had a lot of Christian martyrs that followed on, who were thrown to the lions and persecuted in many ways in the early days of Christianity, the Piscean era. So you may actually set yourself up during this time as some sort of a savior for other people and martyr yourself. Now, you might not be killed, obviously, well, hopefully not, but you might be giving yourself away constantly for other people. That can drain you, that can burn you out and deplete you. Be very aware of this. It is a tendency of the 12th house of the sign of Pisces or of Neptune. What about artistic and creative expression? Divine inspiration. Well, this is a wonderful period when Neptune is transiting the 12th house for producing some truly beautiful masterpieces that come from your higher consciousness or from inspiration from ancestors or other beings even who are giving you this beautiful inspiration. So you may find that you write poetry second to none or create a film that is just life-changing for everyone who watches it. Those sorts of inspiring creative endeavors flow easily now under this transit. If you work in these fields, music, art, film, writing, any type of creativity, you may find that your work absolutely flourishes under this transit and that you are creating like you've never created before. You're inspired all the time. It's a prolific creative experience and it brings the highest manifestations of your artistry and work to the world. So beautiful. Now, because Neptune is connected to inspiration, you're going to be inspired now and your creative imagination will be on fire. How wonderful. And the 12th house is also one of the healing houses. For those who don't know, the 12th house is the divine, mystical, magical healing or healing that comes from inspired means. And we might use the illustration of Louis Pasteur, who invented penicillin as an example. You know, that has changed the world in an inspired way through medicine, which is a very Neptunian, Piscean 12th house thing. Medicines that are coming, well, that are inspired, let's say. The 8th house is actually to do with surgeries and healing through inner psychological deep work. And the 6th house is another healing house through practical service and you know, so nursing, caring, going to your GP, you know, maybe even some alternative practices as well, like going to a naturopath or a dietitian. Those very practical, everyday means of healing are very 6th house. So they are the different healing modalities related to house. But in the 12th house, which is obviously a house of healing, we might actually be able to heal our souls now through cleansing of our past life experiences, through cleansing our early childhood experiences. It's supported to do that sort of work now. So you may be able to see a psychologist. That is certainly something you could do. Even though, like I've just described, the 8th house does have connections to to the psychological work, you can also bring that in to the 12th house because of that past life connection that the 12th house has. You may also find that through some sort of channeling or psychic medium, you can heal your past life experience. Getting a message from a psychic can be so healing. I had this experience just last week where, I just have to share it actually, where a psychic told me about a scenario in a previous past life that she saw, where for one reason or another I was chained up for a long period of time until the chain began to embed in my shin on my right leg. And when I came home and I had a shower that evening and I looked at my right leg and I realized that I have, in my old age, a big conglomeration of varicose veins right on my shin. There's none around it. The rest of my leg is fine. But I have this random conglomeration of veins very close to the surface on my shin at the point where she was pointing to when I had my stockings on. So she couldn't see this varicose vein conglomeration. And I find things like that are just a bit too uncanny to ignore. And I actually feel that knowledge is healing. And when you know about something, and when you see the connections, it starts to transmute that. It no longer has power over you. The experience no longer is eating away at you because you realize what it was and you see it for what it was. And in this case, I know I'm beyond that experience now. That was in my past. It's not part of who I am right now. I'll let you know if the veins go away and things improve with my leg. But it's these kind of like experiences with, say, really good psychics or mediums or channelers, the top-notch ones who really know what they're doing, that are actually very cleansing and healing and transformative for us. And you can have those sorts of experiences during this transit of Neptune to the 12th house. Forgiveness comes easier now. Neptune is a very high octave of Neptune, and both those planets have to do with forgiving. And you will have a greater capacity to forgive those who've hurt you, either in a past life or in this life. And if you need to heal your soul by offering forgiveness to someone, it doesn't mean you have to go and sort of be a martyr to them or be put down by them or even do it in person. You can just energetically turn to that person and say, I forgive you, and I know you're no longer in my life or whatever, but I forgive what you did to me and I choose to heal my soul and move on now. Forgiving comes easier when Neptune is here, and you can have profound mystical healing of the soul and the body through forgiveness. As I've already illustrated, any past life work can be very healing and cathartic now. Past life regression is one way of doing that. Also, as I've just illustrated, seeing particular people who are talented with those sorts of things, like being able to visualize and see your past lives for you. I always feel, or rather I have always felt, a bit of caution around necessarily trusting another person's interpretation unless there's clear evidence that what they're seeing is reality, like the illustration I've just given you. If there's no clear evidence or synchronicity with your life, then do take it with a grain of salt. It really is more powerful to experience your past lives yourself because you know they're coming from your own subconscious and your own past lives rather than being told. So I put past life regression up here and connection with sort of psychics and channelers and what have you a little lower than that. And do make sure that you check in and look for the synchronicities with what they're telling you. Does it line up with what you're experiencing in this current incarnation? If not, maybe discount it. But the point I'm trying to make here is that Neptune through the 12th house can indicate past life work can be very healing and liberating for the soul and the body. And of course, the 12th house is dreams, night dreams and daydreams, and a house of visualizations. This can actually be very healing. The more you dream, the more you can become what you dream. You start to embrace it, you start to embody it. So during this transit, take regular opportunity to daydream, to visualize, to imagine. Maybe have a dream journal where you write down your imaginings. Maybe you write down your night dreams as well. And use those things as tools for your healing. There's a beautiful old adage, if you dream it, you can become it. And I love that. I think that is the mantra for Neptune moving through the 12th house. This series has been such a joy for me to do. It has expanded my conscious awareness. It's revealed so much truth to me. I am so grateful that I was able to do this and that I finally got around to putting it all together for you. I hope it's a blessing to you in the way it has been for me. Please share this series with people who need to hear its message, and tune in every 14 years or so to get the update on the next transit of Neptune that you'll be experiencing. Thank you and God bless.